more summary picture of the vegetation. I've simply simplified this into, these are just trees, this is the alder, these are our herbs, ferns, grasses, and then cereals, particularly wheat, and then we've got cypress, olive. This is simply the amount of pollen which is accumulating, and then I have other data sets over here in relation to other reconstructions of climate during this time period, and we have population. Okay. So what we note is, during the medieval period, okay, we have periods with very low percentages of forest, which we think were active periods of deforestation. We know from the reconstructed Palmer Drought Severity Index from tree rings in Morocco that in fact this period was dry. It was also warmer, and in this area agriculture was at about 1,000 meters, much higher than can be sustained today. So what we think was going on was this was a period during medieval times when there was an increase in population, an expansion of agriculture, more deforestation on the slopes, higher rates of erosion, and a dried out plain where they were able to drain the water and produce and convert the basin into agriculture with fairly high amounts of cereal pollen. This region was on the boundary between the Papal States and the Kingdom of Naples. So it ended up being in something of a zone where there would be periodic invasions. And so it could have been, and this is something we're trying to explore, that during certain periods with invasions, when people came in, they would then remove the local population for a while. If you take people off of the landscape, it provides an opportunity for the forest to recover. And so possibly, these periods when we have high tree pollen are periods of recovery, when in fact the forest is able to reestablish itself in the absence of people. This is a hypothesis that we hope to test as we improve the chronology and get more historical information. Because we see deforestation, reforestation, deforestation, reforestation, these very interesting cycles. We think that these are not associated with climate, but with socioeconomic conditions. So one of the things when you're reconstructing the environment using physical records is there's the assumption that climate drives the system. But in an area where there's intense population, that's clearly not going to always be the case. It's going to be confounded. And so what we're very curious to see is, are these, can we identify, can we find anything in the historical record to compare against these to know that in fact these are periods not of climate but of socioeconomic change. We also know that this was a period when we switched from the Benedictines to the Cistercians, and I love this. One of the writers who write about them, they talk about them as the shock troops of forest clearing. And so they had a mandate to clear forests and expand and use the land and produce food. So there's periods here when those monks are here and potentially really changing. And so we're trying to kind of explore that from both the physical and the historical side. All right. When we get up to our next zone here, okay, we see that there was a strong decline in population associated with the plague here in Italy. We also know that fairly soon after that, we saw this recovery of forests. And so other things happened. There was an earthquake that destroyed Rieti, okay? And so all of these things contributed to a real decline in the local population. Well, remember that in order to kind of keep this plain dry, you need to maintain the channels. And so if you have less labor you have less opportunity possibly for cutting your forest and maintaining the channels. Not only that, but the climate changed as well. We can see that we flipped from a dry over to a wet period during this time period. And so we switched over to a period of the Little Ice Age, potentially associated with a shift in the North Atlantic Oscillation in terms of the location of low pressure systems and high pressure systems dominating over this part of Europe. Okay, so there's good evidence for systematic change in the Atlantic that could have driven the temperature and precipitation changes in Italy, and what we see in response is a strong increase in the amount of alder flooded forest in the basin, as well as a period of reforestation.